Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. So today I'm actually going to do something a little different. I know I normally like to post the music videos, but I wanted to discuss just a fan theory of mine that I've had for a while. I have tried researching this on the internet. I haven't found anything. I found one lone meme about this, and it's kind of bugging me that it's not been a more prevalent fan theory. Or certainly, as far as my research abilities go, it has not been a very extensive look into this topic, which I'm going to tackle. So I wanted to discuss the connection between two fantastically written villains of both film and television. One of which is Kaiser Soze from a film called The Usual Suspects. And if you haven't seen that film, there are going to be spoilers, and it is a fantastic movie, so please watch it before you watch this video. And the other villain, is Gustavo Fring from a show called Breaking Bad. And this is going to center around the connection between those two villains. Let me just start off by saying that they're very fantastically written characters. If we're talking about Usual Suspects, Kaiser Soze is such a fantastically written villain that he never really has to appear in the film, in fact. He doesn't have to say or do anything. He doesn't have to be seen. And just the mere mention of his name is enough to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies, and it commands compliance and utter respect. And this is echoed throughout the movie in several instances. For instance, during a discussion that one of the main characters is having with a police officer, it mentions that Kaiser Soze did this himself. He killed his entire family just to prove a point about how strong his willpower is to his enemies. He is so known in the criminal world that during a scene with an attorney, the given name is Kobayashi. Again, the film is so well written, we don't actually know if this is that character's name. More than likely it's not. That just bringing up his name to this group of criminals completely alters their mood within the scene. And in the film's climax, towards the very end, we're given a glimpse into his absolute power and utter ruthlessness as a criminal. When the film reaches its climax, he has one lone person, right, on this ship who knows who he is and can identify who he is as a person. He has every single person on the dock and in the ship killed, and then he kills this one lone person who can identify who he is. And if that's not enough, the film proves just how cunning he is in terms of his creativity, his intelligence, and the very last few minutes of the film itself. And one of the things that makes this such a masterful film and makes Kaiser Soze such a great villain is that you never know his true identity. After the closing minutes of the film, most of us make up our minds. We're pretty sure that we know who Kaiser Soze is, but the film doesn't actually confirm it. And that is what makes it so cool. Conversely, we have Gustavo Fring from Breaking Bad. Gustavo Fring is the biggest supplier of crystal meth in New Mexico. Gus is very gifted in the art of deception. He's been able to go about his criminal career completely undetected by using the guise of being a successful businessman. He's been able to completely avoid suspicion from law enforcement for many years. So he's able to hide in plain sight. Kaiser Soze doesn't have to do that. Kaiser just kind of is a phantom. But one big difference, though, is that Gus interfaces with his street soldiers. They're very aware of his existence. He communicates in close proximity. And he does this despite maintaining this veneer of being a successful businessman. So a big difference in Gustavo Fring from Kaiser Soze is that he lacks a little bit of the mystique, because his close associates know who he is. Whereas with Kaiser Soze, like one or two people know who he is, and that's it. And in fact, law enforcement isn't even sure if Kaiser Soze is a real person. Some of them actually suspect that it's Keaton, from Keaton's gang in the movie Usual Suspects, who is portrayed by Gabriel Byrne. Another huge difference in their role as criminal kingpins of the underworld is their choice in who carries out their day-to-day activities. Gus picks people who are extremely educated, composed, and utterly competent in the way that they carry out their designated tasks. He purposely tries to avoid people who have personality disorders, drug addiction issues. He's looking for the absolute best of the best and people who are just utterly composed. Kaiser, on the other hand, preys upon the criminal element to carry out his tasks, right? And it doesn't matter if they're extremely competent or if they fuck up and get caught. And part of the reason I believe that what drives either of those characters to choose those henchmen accordingly is the fact that one has a very high element of anonymity and the other doesn't. At least on paper, they know what his identity is. I mean, ultimately, we probably don't know who Gus Fring really is, but they have a good understanding of who he is. They know what he looks like. So it's important that the people who work for Gus not fuck up and not get caught by law enforcement. As well as that, Gus also has a certain amount of a belief in having redundancy, right? So in addition to hiring Walter to make his crystal meth, he also hires a really brilliant chemist named Gail Bettiger. In addition to his primary investigator and henchman, Mike, there's also another gentleman who helps to investigate. And if we look at the way that they carry things out, Mike is extremely gifted not only in investigation, but at anticipating the actions of Gus's enemies. And that happens throughout the series, where things happen that are supposed to put a rift in the way Gus's operations are going, and Mike is great at anticipating that and countering that and neutralizing the enemy like that, cool, calm, and collected and to the point. So, where was I? Oh yeah, competency. So, we see also with Gus a certain amount of ruthlessness, like Kaiser, in his attempt to dodge guilt, right, or to avoid getting caught. For instance, in one episode, he takes a box cutter very coolly, calmly, and collectedly, and in a brilliantly written scene, right, because you don't know if he's going to attack Walter, without saying a word, he slices the carotid artery of one of the other henchmen who was seen at the scene of the crime, right? So this kind of parallels that cunning and the ruthlessness of Kaiser Soze. Gus even goes so far as to poison himself, just to ensure that every member of a rival cartel is killed off. In the scene where he's actually toasting to their health, he poisons the booze and they drop dead. But again, this shows how calculating Gus is as a villain, because he has an entire medical team nearby to administer care to him, and actually they have blood of his that is donated in the event that he were to get shot. And I don't remember off the top of my head if he does get shot in that scene or not, but I believe that he did. One big difference, and you can argue this either way, is that Gus has some sense of underlying loyalty. And you see this in a flashback sequence that is echoed throughout the show, is that the original chemist that he hires when he is up and coming in the world of becoming a drug supplier, is that they have his chemist murdered right in front of him. And this stays with him throughout the series, and in my opinion, drives his motivation for revenge. Again, you could just argue that he was a selfish businessman and that this messed up business, and that's why he did it. But in my opinion, I think part of that stemmed from a sense of loyalty to this young man he had hired to make drugs for him. But one of the limitations of this of film in and of itself is just time, right? You know, in 2 hours you can't shove a whole lot of material into a plot line. But one of the things is that we're never given a chance to see Kaiser be vulnerable. And that, in my opinion, is what makes him such a great villain, and what makes The Usual Suspects such a great film. Is that because ultimately we don't want to. That's what makes him the ultimate villain. So, in addition to that, it's a lot harder to maintain mystique within a television show, just from a character development standpoint, right? Like, you can't have a character be a phantom for 2 seasons, and I believe that's how long Gus was on the show for. So, the connection where these two stories intertwine, in my opinion, you got to go back to The Usual Suspects. And this proves why they're such great villains, in my opinion. If we're operating under the assumption, spoiler alert, if you have not seen The Usual Suspects, stop watching right now in this moment. If we are operating under the assumption that Verbal Kint is Kaiser Soze, the last few minutes tell us a lot about who he is as a person and a criminal mastermind, right? So with almost a pathological sincerity, he has been extemporaneously delivering a story completely fabricated in the moments he's been sitting with Agent Coolion, with utter and complete confidence in his storytelling. And not only that, he crafts this character, Verbal, to be crippled on his left side with cerebral palsy. And again, I believe that this contradicts the only thing that they know about Kaiser Soze is that he's left-handed. I could be wrong in that. And as he walks out of the police station, we're given a glimpse of Officer Jack Bauer, Bayer, however you want to pronounce it, portrayed by Giancarlo Esposito, the same person who portrays Gustavo Fring. Now, Jack Bauer has been sitting with the only sole survivor of the scene from the harbor, right? He is the only person in law enforcement who is even close to knowing the true identity of Kaiser Soze. He's been interviewing this guy all day. He's been working with a sketch artist to get the likeness as detailed as it can possibly be, so that they have at least some chance of capturing Kaiser Soze. And in the sketch, we're found that it is remarkably similar to Verbal Kint. Okay. Yet, despite this, Jack Bauer allows him to walk casually out of the police station. And you got to understand that the difference is that the information that Detective Coolion has is nowhere nearly as reliable as the stuff that Detective Bauer has in figuring out the true identity of Kaiser Soze, his physical appearance, who he is, all that jazz. And yet, despite that, he allows Verbal Kint to just casually stroll right out of the police station. So it is my assumption that Jack Bauer from The Usual Suspects tracks down and kills Kaiser Soze, seizes his empire, and assumes the identity of Gus Fring. That is my fan theory. Take it for what it's worth. I know a retort would possibly be that Kaiser Soze would have the only person who knew his true identity killed off. However, my counter to this would be that if Bauer allows him to just casually walk out of the police station and in no way postures or shows his hand in knowing the true identity of Kaiser Soze, he maintains an element of surprise. So let me know what you think. I'm sorry if it went on too long.